I don't want to alarm you, but Game of the Year season is pretty much upon us. The Game Awards are just around the corner on December 11th, with nominees being announced a month or so prior to that. A majority of the year's heavy hitters have already been released, with a few notable exceptions on the horizon. And in looking at this year's slate of phenomenal potential nominees, I can't help but imagine that voting for Game of the Year in 2025 is going to be an absolute bloodbath. That said, I think I feel pretty confident in which 6 games are going to be nominated for the big prize, and I'll get to that very soon. For now, I just want to acknowledge how 2025 has been a historically bad year for the world at large, but in a bubble, just looking at the art itself, the year has been pretty stellar for games. For my money, the best years in video game history have been 1998, 2001, 2007, 2017, and 2020. Whether 2025 is the kind of year that can crack that list remains to be seen, and that's something that time and distance will help clarify. But for now, all we can do is reflect on the works that have been released this year and attempt to sort out which 6 will be contending for the GOTY in December. I feel pretty confident in saying that the 6 nominees for Game of the Year will be Clair Obscur Expedition 33, Death Stranding 2 On the Beach, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Hollow Knight Silksong, Hades 2, and Ghost of GOTY, with Clair Obscur taking home the gold. Of course, this list reflects what I think will be nominated, not necessarily my personal favorite games of the year, although many of them would be on that shortlist. And yes, now's the time for you to scroll down into the comments and tell me how very wrong these predictions are, while I respond by explaining exactly why I feel like they'll be correct. Expedition 33 feels like a lock, given the excitement around its development story, its wonderful execution, and the near universal praise from anyone who played it. And yes, I stand by the fact that JRPGs did not need a savior, but Clair Obscur has undeniably introduced a lot of new folks to the wonders of turn-based combat, as well as the joys of beating up a mime. A Death Stranding 2 nomination means that Keely's BFF Hideo Kojima will be in attendance, which means another chance for him to trick the night's celebrity presenters into stumbling into his soul-sucking machine. Donkey Kong Bonanza is a technical marvel, an engine of joy, and the first must-own game for the Switch 2. It's also one of the year's great video game titles, despite what some of my more, let's say, uncultured colleagues might say.
I really hate the fucking name.
Silksong is a masterpiece of a sequel that also doubles as a lesson in remembering that every so often, good things actually do come to those who wait. It also introduced us to Sherma, who I would, and did, gladly die 1,000 deaths for. Hades 2 solidified Supergiant's place in the upper echelon of video game developers thanks to its phenomenal characters, incredible performances, and excellent evolution of the original's core loop. It is also pretty dang horny, which is always a plus. And then there's Ghost of GOTY to fill in that big cinematic, crowd-pleasing PlayStation slot for this year. It would join previous first-party Sony nominees like the Horizons and the Spider-Man, and winners like God of War 2018 and The Last of Us Part 2. This is the only one of the 6 that I haven't rolled credits on yet, but I am hoping to do that soon. Of course, that leaves some notable titles left outside looking in. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has its share of devoted fans, but it seems just a smidge too niche for the voting body. Plus, Expedition 33 feels like it's taking the quote-unquote RPG slot, despite how massively different the 2 games are. Likewise, Blueprints made this year's first big indie splash, but I feel like its particular flavor of roguelike randomness really didn't gel with some folks, and the subsequent releases of Silksong and Hades 2 took the year's indie spotlight away from it. Elden Ring Night Rain feels a bit too fragmented from the core game that won back in 2022, or even Shadow of the Erdtree, which was nominated last year. And while Split Fiction scored impressively high reviews, it does seem as if the conversation surrounding the game died much more quickly than it did for Hazelight's previous GOTY winner, It Takes Two. This isn't even accounting for games that resonated super strongly with me on a personal level. Stuff like Wanderstop, Citizen Sleeper 2, The Alters, Fantasy Life I, the 100-line Last Defense Academy, and Sword of the Sea are all fantastic games that had the misfortune of releasing in a historically great year. And we haven't even touched on the remakes and re-releases of Stone Cold Steve Austin classics like Final Fantasy Tactics, The Evil East Chronicles, Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, and Trails in the Sky the first chapter. Looking at this massive list of bangers that have released in 2025 bums me out a bit when I think about just how much time and energy was spent online debating what I feel to be the most boring aspects of these works of art. Stuff like price to hours of play ratio, difficulty settings, minor performance hiccups, and what should and shouldn't constitute as DLC. Each of these games has an unending well of fascinating topics to discuss outside of these grabby or hot button issues, and I hope that a bit of space will help the more thoughtful conversations bubble up to the top. I play a lot of games, and even for me, it's been genuinely tough to keep up with all the big new releases this year. While there were some occasional lulls that allowed us to chip away at our backlogs, those were inevitably followed by a wave of new games, both big and small, hitting shelves and digital storefronts. While most of the year's biggies have already been released, there are a few notable exceptions before the holidays, like Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, but I don't know, I've had a bit of an uneasy feeling about that one for the better part of a decade, though I would love to be proven thoroughly wrong. I'm also personally looking forward to the likes of Black Ops 7, Kirby Air Riders, and Skate Story, even if the odds of them usurping any of my predicted 6 seem slim. And just to nip things in the bud, the Game Awards are absolutely not some infallible arbiter of objective quality in art, because that is stupid and doesn't exist. The voting pool is made up of an increasingly diverse but still relatively narrow slice of critics and outlets. And while the notion that there's some shadowy cabal pulling the strings and orchestrating the winners is patently absurd, there are undoubtedly some more niche genres that get overlooked simply because not enough folks who vote on these things are part of those niches. And that's okay. These awards have no impact whatsoever on you loving the games you love, hating the games you hate, and not caring about the games that you already didn't care about. I just find them fascinating from a cultural standpoint and a pretty decent arbiter of which way the wind's blowing across the industry at any given moment. Also, it's nice to see luminaries like Al Pacino utterly baffled by this dumb, wonderful medium of ours.
I don't play a whole lot of video games.
While this video tended to veer off into me just listing a bunch of games, that's kind of the point. While 2025 has been generally awful for the games industry, it's been a banner year for games themselves across nearly every shape, size, and form imaginable. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it's represented come December. And barring any last-minute surprises, I feel pretty confident with my pick for the 6 Game of the Year nominees. Oh no, I'm gonna have to redo this entire video.
Faridula si manette, doni point à volinette, pina sans mi manicette, d'un affant sur le banc.